All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and we're going to get right into our story this week. Once again, this is a update, just edited and everything else. I've been doing this a little bit with some of the older content, just going back through doing some nice fresh recordings of it. That's really all. Also, I'm going to be setting this up on podcast for some of you who have been wanting podcast. I'll let you know shortly here on the YouTube channel where you can find that podcast, as I am still determining where I'd like to keep it. So, let's get started with this week's updated encounter story. Multiple Bigfoot scares fishermen near Frog Lake, Oregon. Not Bullfrog Lake, but Frog Lake up in the Mount Hood National Forest. That is where I was, well, escorted, in a not-so-nice way, back to my car by multiple Bigfoot. For a moment there, to tell you the truth, I thought they were hunting me. In the end, as you will probably come to see, I don't think hunting was their focus that late afternoon or early evening. I personally feel they just wanted me gone. Here's my story. An event that has seriously changed me for good. Fly fishing on Frog Lake. I currently reside just outside of Estacada, Oregon. I moved back here in the late 1995 when my mom and dad needed some serious help. I figured I would only be here for a short time, maybe a year. Then I would move back to Hawaii. As a kid, I dreamed of the island life, beautiful beaches, girls, surfing girls, windsurfing girls, and did I mention girls? Ha! Actually, I'm happily married today, and after that first year back in Oregon, I was surprised how badly I missed it. Originally, my family lived in Brookings and moved to a small town outside of Estacada in the late 1980s. Anyway, to make a long biographical story short for you, I ended up coming home to help them because of a health scare. And soon enough, fell back in love with Oregon. And yes, a girl. My experience happened back in the spring of 2004, up at Frog Lake in the Mount Hood National Forest. For the first and last time, I was literally surrounded by multiple Bigfoot at once while fishing. Like the encounter story I read about the guy and kids up this way, I too was escorted away, I believe. Although at first, I thought I was dinner. There is nothing like the feelings you have when you see one or more of these Bigfoot. I'm telling you now, you'll grow eyes in the back of your head when you're out in the woods the rest of your life, if you do. Before I get into my account, I think you should know that I have been up around this area before, plenty of times. So no, I do not believe this is a habituation site. I think they were passing through and hunting or feeding at the time. But here is what happened. Fly fishing and frogs. I had been interested at the time in fly fishing. Still am. And just so you know, if I would have known how many hunters and fishermen have seen or come across Bigfoot in this area, well, I would have known to bring protection at least. It's funny, some people say there is no Bigfoot, yet the only time they are in the great outdoors, well, it is the camping weekend once a summer. If you spend some time out here, though, you never know what you'll run into or experience. But as I was saying, I was getting into fly fishing and had recently got all the gear I needed. And I took a local class offered by a gentleman a few months before the day of my encounter. Or, better yet, the day I freaked out. I would head to Frog Lake to practice that early spring. I was not really into catching anything to eat, just catching and release. Catch and release is what I was wanting to do. In the end, I really just wanted to get the art of fly fishing mastered. Frog Lake is small and full of frogs. Well, to tell you the truth, it has probably as many as any other lake around this neck of the woods. However, there is something special about this oversized pond called a lake. It is just beautiful here. Plus, I need to learn to fly fish, as I wanted to start up an outdoor guide business within a few years from that point, taking people out to fly fish up to and around this area. Anyways, I headed up in the afternoon after working around my parents' place and doing some work at their place of business. My parents were local business owners and very successful. I know that Better fishing is always early morning or early evening, but as I said, I ended up getting there around 2 p.m., give or take a few that day. There is a little clearing where some trees had been cut down and only stumps and some low brush remain, where I love to fish the most. Not to mention, this time, I could get out into the water with my new waders. I parked the car, got my gear together, plus a backpack full of water and snacks, and headed over there. It was not that far, maybe 50 yards, give or take a few. The fishing, to my surprise, for that first hour to an hour and a half was great. I actually caught 3 nice-sized bass with a dry fly. Whistling and chatter in the forest. Well, by 4 p.m., the day was turning out to be awesome, and my casting was starting to at least feel somewhat natural. However, I was hungry and needed to take a break, so I walked over to the open area, sat down next to my backpack, near the only tree in that open area that gave some shade, and started to eat and take in the beauty that surrounded me. I had been here plenty of times before, as I said before. I even hiked in here from nearly 7 miles south of it. There are trails you can take through here. A big one actually runs right next to the lake, just up on the ridge opposite where I was sitting at the time. To hear mumbling voices, well, it is not a real shock, not even at this point in the season. However, when you hear voices in the woods, it does catch you off guard for a moment, no matter what. They sounded like they were coming from the trail opposite me on the small lake, and from up top the ridge. It also sounded like 2 people, well, what I thought were people, bantering back and forth. One would say something, the other would answer. They did not seem far away from each other. That is another reason for my brain to automatically assume, I believe, that they were human at first. I sat there waiting to see if they would come down to the lake. As the voices continued, I ate a little and drank some water, and of course, in between, I would mess around with my flies. I was going to change out from a red to a green fly and see how well the fish would respond. As I was changing the flies, the voices stopped, I realized. I looked around the shoreline of the oversized pond called a lake for people. Nothing, nobody, not a soul could be seen anywhere. They must have moved on down the trail to wherever they were headed, I thought. It was back to birds chirping and the wind softly blowing through the pine trees. By the way, I love the sound of the wind up here. It is just calming, to tell you the truth. I waded back out and bam, fish on. In mere seconds. I suppose that green, dry fly was better after all. I was a fly fisherman extraordinaire for about the next 45 minutes to an hour. I caught and released what seemed to have been at least 5 to 6 fish. I was getting good at it, though. I was so good, I heard someone whistle at me. Well, at least I thought it was me they were whistling at. And before I could crack a smile at that fact, I remembered where I was. My head darted up instantly as I scanned the shore of the lake opposite from me. Nobody, not a single soul again. But I heard a whistle. I swore at that time I heard it. I did not imagine it. Maybe the hikers from earlier were passing through again, heading back, or maybe these were new hikers. Either way, that is when I heard another whistle, this time from the west and on my side of the lake. Were they communicating because they got split up? That was the best answer I could come up with. I stood there and continued fishing, while every few minutes or so the whistling would continue. It was about 20 minutes later that I started getting that back of the neck creepy feeling. I mean, seriously, should they not have found each other yet? They'd been whistling at that point for about 20 minutes at least. Another whistle came. This one was, I suppose, in answer to one of the one from a few minutes before that was still west of me, and probably, hopefully, a ways in past the tree line. The hair on my neck stood up. At that time I really listened to the whistle closely. It was not as, I guess, human sounding as I had simply assumed earlier when it started. It was loud for being that far away, to tell you the truth, and it was sharper sounding than a human whistle, if that makes any sense to you. I decided to get out of the water and relocate near to my truck. Grunts, growls, and rocks. It was just as I was getting my waders off that I heard a splash in the lake. A harsh splash. And it was actually just near where I was fishing just moments before. It was not a fish jumping. It was still a little too early for them to start feeding like that. Actually, I knew for a fact this was an object landing in the lake, like a small rock or something. As I slipped on my boots, I kept my eyes peeled on just about everything after that. It did make it a little harder to get my boots on and tied with my head moving around so much, but I started to feel quite nervous at that point. Kerplunk! Splash! Another albeit large rock hit the water near the opposite side of the lake. Now, this was all just getting way too weird. I did not see anyone, and I know that a bear or any other predator out here cannot, I repeat for you non-believers out here, they cannot throw rocks. But that is what was happening. Someone was throwing rocks in the water. Weird and nervous as all get out, I started walking briskly toward the other side of the lake, where I was parked in a semi kind of parking lot. I was not scared. I just wanted to relocate for now. Maybe they were just some of those weird forest people you hear about up here trying to scare me off. Well, if that was the case, and that is what started running through my mind at that time, those hippie weirdos had another thing coming. I'd rather stay and give them what their parents did not, a good butt-whooping. Playing with the thought of getting even with so-called forest people in my mind actually calmed me down. I was not weirded out anymore. Actually, I was feeling a little bit pissy instead. But I decided to grab my bear spray from the tackle box and clip it to my pants. I put my waders away and figured on just doing some fly fishing off a log that was running out into the lake. If I slipped off, well, it was only knee-deep at best. I could live with that. So I walked back to the lake. From there I could see my truck about 35 yards away, and that was the smartest thing I did all day, stay close to the truck from that moment on. I started fishing again. It was nearing dusk, so seeing across the lake was not impossible, but any distance into the tree line around me was impossible, period. I also noticed that the whistles were starting up again, but they were some distance away, so maybe, just maybe, whoever they were leaving. That was not to be, and nor were they people, as in human beings. A really weird but deep guttural growl came from the south, basically to my left, inside of the tree line. That was not human. Once again, like the whistle, it just sounded different. The thought of these weird forest folks faded away quickly. I have heard bear grunts and huffs. This was not that either. This was like something as deep and scary, like something from a movie. I mean, I could feel the grunt. It, vibrated right through me. I reeled in my line and backed off the log. Of course, I still had my backpack sitting there with its contents somewhat all over the place, and my tackle box was in some disarray as well. Started packing things away as quick as I could. But unfortunately, it was not as quick as I would have liked at the time. Another grunt, and this time from the opposite side of me. I was scared all of a sudden as yet another grunt came from behind me. I was basically surrounded. The only path was either into the water or a beeline to the truck. So the truck, it was. I packed as fast and furiously as I could. I did not go as fast as I did want to go. You know how it is. And just for safety reasons, though, I took the bear spray that I had in my backpack after all, fortunately, and sprayed some in the air. The idea was to let whatever they were, or at least one of them, know that there was some nastiness that could come from me. I wanted to build up some fear of me in them, it, or whatever it was. Wishful thinking, I suppose, but I've heard of people doing that, and it working out pretty well. Another grunt from the right came as I finished packing and started walking back to the truck. I got only a few yards when I was struck by a stick from the woods. Literally, I was hit with a stick. It did not really hurt. It was more like a really long, thick twig, but it hit me nonetheless and scared the poop out of me. I started to walk faster, and then it came, a wild shriek and scream I hope to never hear again. It was so loud, so scary, so monstrous that I fell to one knee for a moment. I could feel that scream, the vibration, even well, it felt angry itself being directed right at me. As I stood back up, I looked to the left towards the low ridge where the trail, where the trail was I'd mentioned earlier. For a split second or so, I saw what looked to be the reddest eyes I've ever seen peeking out from behind the large pine tree. Whatever it was tall. It had to be at least 3 heads taller than me, and I am 6'1". I could also make out the right side of the upper torso. That was massive too. As a matter of fact, when it moved back behind the tree, I could still make out it was there. This thing was big, black, and some vicious-looking red eyes that I swear were looking right through me. It was time to walk faster. Monster behind my car. I could hear them on both sides crashing about through the undergrowth as they basically paralleled me just inside the tree line and almost all the way back to my car. It was getting darker now. I could barely see the edge of the tree line anyway. I could tell from the sound that they, in fact, were bipedal at least. I could hear footfall like you and I would make. As they paralleled me, it was as I approached the car that I finally realized my worst nightmare and thoughts were at the moment coming true. Bigfoot. I am being hunted or escorted by Bigfoot. But it was not until I was about 20 feet or so from the truck that I knew for a fact that Bigfoot does exist. I did not want to believe it because I just could not wrap my head around it. The idea that Bigfoot really exists was just a reach in my mind. But as I approached my truck, the right side of the turnaround I was parked in, a tall, dark figure stepped out into reality. I could not make out a face. Apparently the skin color, if there was any showing at the time, was nearly the same dark color as the rest of the body, or the hair covering it. I could make out hair, dark hair at that, probably black, but I could not be sure as it was even darker by then, and this thing was standing just near the edge of the tree line inside the shadows. I could tell that it was at least 8 to 9 feet tall, and it was not the height that got me scared, it was the broadness of this creature. From shoulder to shoulder, I think it could have held 2 of me in a bear hug and with room to spare. I could also see that it was swaying back and forth, as if it was determining if it should come at me or stay where it was. I could not stand still. I had to run. I ran to the truck, dropping everything in my hands. As I reached the truck, I opened the door and dove inside, shutting it behind me. The keys were already in the ignition. I started it and threw that thing into reverse. As I backed up, I saw from the corner of my eye that large figure, this time, however, just a few feet away from the truck. I started to peel out, and at the same time, felt a thump on the side of the truck, and what sounded like a screech from HE double hockey sticks. It took me almost 30 minutes before I pulled over near civilization to pull myself together. I really feared for my life, but I was now, finally, safe. Back to Frog Lake. So now that I am a guide today, have been for quite some time, I have returned to Frog Lake. Not that I want to, but I make no mention of it to my customers. I go if they want. Besides, there is truly safety in numbers, that's for sure, and I think it goes for keeping Bigfoot at bay as well. I do not go alone, nor will I ever. I do go to other places alone, but they are usually more populated places. So in the end, I'm not really alone after all. Am I scared? No, not really, not today. But I am aware, as we all should be. These things exist, and they can be dangerous, I believe. Thanks, Rafe.